Hello, everybody,
and welcome to Friday Apocryphal Podcast, your one-stop shop for everything Friday Apocryphal and podcast. And boy, do we have a show for you today. Today we are covering 2 Maccabees chapters 3 through 4.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
It was totally
Groovin'.
asynchronous today.
Basically choking on my coffee halfway through that. Okay. Wow. Well, I'm going to take an actually satisfying sip of coffee.
All right, you go ahead and do that. Well, I tell everybody that we are continuing 2 Maccabees today.
Yes, we're covering chapters 3 through 4, and I'll be reading 3 from the Anchor Bible, 2 Maccabees, a new translation with introduction and commentary by Jonathan A. Goldstein.
And then I'll be reading chapter 4 from that. So that's the translation we are using, but we can also check it with the commentary and translation of 2 Maccabees from the Hermenia translation by Robert Doran.
Robert Doran.
Yes, and he is actually the same person who wrote the commentary in volume 6 of the New Interpreter's Bible commentary.
Wonderful. So we're getting a very Doran-esque theology.
And we also have Erdman's.
Yep.
Yeah, I think those are the translations that we're in commentaries we're using. So,
and unfortunately, it is apocryphal, so no altar.
No altar.
Yeah, that's a shame. But without any further ado, let's hop into this. The miraculous thwarting of Heliodorus.
Yeah. So, this section, I'm going to comment here from the New Interpreter's Bible commentary. This is the first of the epiphanies of God related in the epitome. It is placed as an antitype to what is to happen under Antiochus IV when the high priests and the people are entangled in sin.
All right. I'm just checking if there's a note. I mean, I'm sure there's a note.
There's a whole bunch of notes everywhere. We got a lot of them.
Yeah. Okay, that's way too long of a note for me to go over. But they were basically just talking about dating. And I'm sure you have something about the dating in there.
Well, it's because this is the abridgment of Jason's work now.
Yeah.
So there is a large debate about dating. We covered it in the first episode.
Yeah.
So there's
which is why I figured you have something about dating in there.
Yeah, we covered it in the first episode of this book.
Yeah.
So
yeah. A lot of information.
Yeah.
Anyways, chapter 3. Under the high priest Onias, the inhabitants of the holy city enjoyed undisturbed peace, and there was the strictest observance of the laws because of his piety and hatred of wickedness. It also frequently happened that even the kings honored the place and contributed to the glory of the temple with the most sumptuous gifts. In fact, Seleucus, I'm going to say Seleucus.
go ahead.
King of Asia, provided for all the expenses of the sacrificial cult out of his own revenues. There was a certain Simon from the clan of Bilgah who held the post of chief administrator of the temple. This Simon had a dispute with the high priest over the city office of market controller.
So there's a good amount of stuff here. So the Greek texts and the main Latin texts give this tribe as Benjamin, actually, instead of Bilgah. But some Latin texts and the Armenian tradition connect him with the priestly family of Bilgah. A man from such a priestly family would be more likely than a non-priestly Benjaminite to become chief administrator. That's what's used in here of the temple. And the word there that's used is prostates, and that's a verb from the same root is used to describe the powers of the high priest Simon in 1 Maccabees 14.
Well, speaking of Benjaminites, in our Deuteronomistic history review, which, if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out after the show. There was quite a bit about the Benjamites.
Yeah, they really done goofed, and they got nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's their history,
Yeah.
basically, in a nutshell. Anyway, this Office of Market Controller, is that like an economic position in the city's governance, or is it like a sheriff in the market type thing?
Well, Simon's exact position is not known, as the term for prostatis, which we covered before, is translated as chief administrator, or in this one is translated as captain. It can encompass civil and military as well as religious affairs.
Wow.
Nor do we know by whom he was appointed, whether by the high priest or by the Seleucid governor. He was certainly an important person.
All right. Unable to prevail over Onias, he went to Apollonius, son of Tharsius, who was governor of Coelis, Syria, and Phoenicia at that time.
Yeah, so Tarsus here is a correction of the Greek Tarso, or Thrasio, translated son of Tarsios or Thrasios, made on the grounds that the governor was not Apollonius, son of Tarsios, but Apollonius, son of Menesthius, which is in 4:4 and 421. But it is possible that this was a later governor.
All right. And divulged the information that the treasury at Jerusalem was full of untold sums of money, such that their total was incalculable. These funds, it's like the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, audit the Fed, right? He's just like, no, you don't have to count our money. We have infinite money. It's incalculable. Okay. These funds, he said, had not been brought as offerings to the account for sacrifices. Rather, it was possible for them all to fall under the provisions of the king's right to confiscate. In conversation with the king, Apollonius reported the disclosures concerning the money. The king summoned Heliodorus, the chief minister, and sent him with orders to collect the aforesaid money. Heliodorus, this is like a mafia type thing. He's like, I'll get out there and get my money, right? Heliodorus set out at once on the pretext that he was making a tour of inspection of the cities of Coelis, Syria, and Phoenicia. But, in fact, he meant to carry out the king's intention. On his arrival at Jerusalem, he was greeted warmly by the high priest and the city. He then told them of what had been divulged and revealed the purpose of his coming. When he asked whether the money really was as described, the high priest declared that, contrary to the false report of the impious Simon, it consisted partly of deposits of widows and orphans, and partly of deposits of Hyrcanus the Tobiad.
Yeah, so the combination widows and orphans may suggest that the author is referring here to the tithes set aside for them. If we go back to Deuteronomy, there's some stuff on that. Deuteronomy 14 and Deuteronomy 16.
Yeah, they get some number of shekels or some shit if they lose their family or their husband.
Yeah, something
it's
like
very nice. Thank you.
And that mention at the end of Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, has raised many questions. Josephus relates the history of the family of the Tobiads that shows them as closely allied with the Ptolemies. The youngest son, Hyrcanus, son of Joseph, son of Tobias, was forced by his brothers to flee Jerusalem. He escaped to the Transjordan, where he is said to have committed suicide when he realized he could not escape the clutches of Antiochus IV. Many scholars believe that the fact that Onias III has deposits in his temple of a pro-Ptolemaic anti-Seleucid Hyrcanus shows the pro-Ptolemaic leanings of the high priest, and thus the debate between Onias and Simon was really between parties sympathetic to the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, respectively. Such an analysis reads a great deal into one brief mention in a dramatically composed speech. Thucydides, the great historian of the Peloponnesian War, laid down the rule that, as it was difficult to remember the exact words a speaker used, the writer should make the speaker say what was appropriate for each occasion. It seems totally out of place that the high priest, when wanting to appease the Seleucids so the temple treasury would not be confiscated, would suddenly flaunt his anti-Seleucid leanings to the Seleucid chancellor. More likely, Hyrcanus, a Tobiad, is mentioned simply as an important person. The reader should not too hastily identify him with the romantic brigand of the Tobiad romance.
Okay. Hyrcanus the Tobiad, a man of very high position, and that the total amounted to 400 talents of silver and 200 of gold. The depositors had put their trust in the sanctity of the place and in the dignity and inviolability of the temple venerated throughout the whole world. To violate their trust, he said, was inconceivable. Heliodorus, acting under the king's orders, replied that he had no choice but to confiscate the money for the royal treasury. On the day he had set, he made his entrance, intending to carry out his inspection of the funds. Great was the anguish throughout the city. The priests, in their priestly vestments, cast themselves before the altar and prayed heavenward to the establisher of the laws of deposits to keep them safe for the depositors.
So that's verse 15, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to check
The establisher of the laws of deposits. That is interesting. I'm checking it too.
Yeah, because I have nothing written on that one specifically, but I am checking verse 15.
Yeah.
And the laws of the depositors?
The laws of deposits are at Exodus 22:6 through 14.
Is it stuff
I don't
about
remember that.
whether or not you can give people things? And
Yeah, I think it's a money lending.
it's a money lending
Okay.
law.
I think so. We could check. We have Bibles in front of us.
Wait, we have a Bible?
Yeah.
We're atheists. We're not supposed to have that.
Look,
Whatever.
I open it up to Exodus 22. What is it? 22:6 through 14. Okay, it's talking about an ox. Okay. And paying people back for their stuff and how to treat other people's goods. Okay.
Yeah, I can't find anything on that specific verse here.
What's the thing you read between those, the middle one? There were three options you read there. What was the middlemost one?
What, in Exodus 22?
Yeah, what's that?
Well, first they talk about
Oxen.
oxen.
And
Then they talk about if you find someone's stuff that's stolen,
okay,
what to do with it.
that's not that. What's the last one?
Well, it keeps going. It's a long section.
Oh, jeez.
It's 6 through 14. So, and what you should do when borrowing from your neighbors. Okay, yeah. So it's a money lending thing. It's definitely a money lending thing.
Fantastic.
Yep. The appearance of the high priest was enough to break one's heart, for his expression and his altered color displayed his mental anguish. The man was, so to speak, immersed in fear and trembling, so that the onlookers saw clearly the pain in his heart. Good actor. People were dashing in droves from their houses to join in mass supplication against the threatened dishonor to the palace. The women, girt with sackcloth under their breasts, thronged the streets. Some of the maidens who were kept in seclusion rushed to the gateways, others to the parapets, and some peered out through the windows. They all were stretching forth their hands to heaven in prayers of entreaty.
So there is a little note here from
And
the
Justin
Hermenia
McClure
commentary.
has a nice comment if you'd like to look at that as well.
Usury.
Yes, usury.
Yeah.
So the note on the women, basically.
Yeah.
All that stuff there. So it says that the contrast between the two groups of women in verse 19 narrows the meaning of, and here's some Greek, so I'm going to try to say this, gunaikos, to married women. In the Hebrew Bible, men frequently gird themselves with sackcloth, but here the signs of mourning are kept for the women. This gender distinction reflects the author's view that men played a public role, but the role of women was in the private sphere. The implication is that women should throng the streets only when there is public mourning. The use in verse 20 of the indirect middle voice of, and here's some more Greek.
You can do it.
Poiastai? Okay. After the previous three active verbs underscores the action of the women.
All right. Well, that's yeah, they were talking about secluded maidens.
Yeah.
Oof. That's no good. It was a pitiful sight, with people of all classes joining in prostrating themselves.
Ooh.
And the high priest in great anguish over what seemed about to happen.
So for the prostrating themselves, what verse was that?
That was 21.
Okay, 21. All right, keep going.
While the people prayed to the Almighty Lord to keep the deposits safe and secure for the depositors, Heliodorus undertook to carry out the king's decree. I just can't. Did you imagine like Christians praying about the economy?
They do.
I think they do, yeah.
They do.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
I'm
some
gonna
of them
say
do.
But
that
like crying and mourning and like, you know, prostrating themselves in the streets.
Well, I don't think they usually go as far as prostrating
Do
themselves.
you guys remember those mega churches that promised if you gave them money that you'd grow money on your own and stuff like that? God will help you grow money. Maybe you guys, I don't know how much you paid attention to that propaganda
I've never
pieces.
watched a megachurch broadcast.
Wow. Okay. Well,
I watched the one that was debunked by James Randi.
fair. Okay. Well, I've seen a couple of them, and I've been to one. I never will go again. It was terrifying. I was quite young. It may impact why I didn't like religion, as well as the fact that I was raised differently. But beyond that, yeah, they talk about money all the time. And if the economy's doing bad, they're feeling real bad.
I mean, yeah, you got to fund your megachurch.
Like, I'm sure they're crying.
Well, that's because they're in it for the money.
Yeah.
Right? They're a mega church.
They need another private jet. How else are they going to get at least two groups of people, different places at once. I mean,
Hey,
these
you know what?
distances we're talking.
As long as they're practicing social distancing.
God told me that only 166,000 people will be able to enter heaven.
It's 144,000.
Okay, 144,000. I added 22. You know, kind of
1,000.
Joseph Smith it up, you know.
Oh, okay.
But you know, every one of those people have to be on a private plane. You can't just walk into heaven. You gotta fly there. Which is why we need all these private planes.
Thank you for that wonderful exegesis, Ruben.
Yep.
Yep, it's manual. People didn't tell you.
Yep. He was already there at the treasury with his bodyguards when the master of the spirits and of every power miraculously intervened, so that all who had the audacity to accompany Heliodorus in their terror over the power of God completely lost their strength and courage.
So one of the notes here,
Blasting with rads.
the title Sovereign of Spirits is similar to the way Hebrews 1:7, interpreting Psalm 104:4, states that God makes angels, winds, and spirits, and to the wisdom of Solomon, and the wisdom of Solomon says that God knows the power of spirits or winds, because in Greek the same word means both spirit and wind. It's pneuma there.
Like the Ruach.
Yeah, kind of.
So, of course, I mean, when it comes to translating Greek, I do know that there's a lot of things that translate to the same word in English that have totally different connotations.
Well, yeah, because English is such a messed up language.
Mm.
We just kind of took from everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the Hermeneutical translation says this on that verse: the ruler of the spirits and of every authority. So the Septuagint, Numbers 16:22 and 27:16, have the title God of the spirits and of all flesh. The title Lord of the spirits is found altogether 104 times in 1st Enoch. And in Hebrews 12:9, the title is Father of spirits.
Yeah, and we did read 1st Enoch.
We did.
Yep, if you didn't see that.
Could do that.
Get on it.
After the show, obviously.
After the show, after the Deuteronomistic history video that you watch. Yeah, just
You've got a playlist
you
from
can
this
stay
video
here all
alone.
day. Yep. For they saw a horse splendidly caparisoned, bearing an awesome rider, charging like a flood. The horse struck at Heliodorus with his forehoofs. They saw...
what verse was that?
This is the middle of verse 25.
Okay.
They saw that the rider wore a golden suit of armor. Yeah, I remember this part.
Yeah, that guy's
When I read this as a
flimsy
kid.
armor.
This guy with golden armor. 2 other young men appeared to Heliodorus. They were of remarkable strength and surpassing beauty, clad in magnificent raiment. They stood by on either side and whipped him unremittingly, laying blow upon him.
So, some scholars have divided the narrative into 2 accounts. Actually, I'll get to that at the end of the chapter. But the flogging thing was a punishment for wrongdoing, and Jewish law stipulated that no more than 40 lashes should be given, for otherwise the person flogged would be degraded. And that's Deuteronomy 25:1-3.
No, what if the guy flogging you would kill you on the first flog?
Pretty strong flogger, that is.
What if they flog you 41st time? Are you
Then you're degraded.
for life?
What?
Yes.
What if the guy flogging you was pitiful and it didn't matter how many times he flogged you?
They would fire him.
Oof.
Maybe. Maybe that was his role in life,
Maybe.
dictated by God.
His purpose in life was to get flogged 45 times.
All right.
Suddenly, Heliodorus fell to the ground and was immersed in deep darkness. They knocked him out. His attendants hastily snatched him up and placed him in a litter. The man had just now entered the aforementioned treasury with a large entourage and a full bodyguard. They proceeded to carry him out as one who had found that arms were of no help to him and who manifestly had learned the power of God. Heliodorus, through divine action, lay prostrate, speechless, and deprived of all hope and help. The Jews, however, blessed the Lord, who glorified his place by a miracle, and the temple, which shortly before had been full of fear and trepidation, was filled with joy and gladness over the manifest intervention of the Almighty Lord. Some of Heliodorus's friends made haste to ask Onias to pray to the highest and grant Heliodorus his life, for he was altogether on the point of breathing his last. The high priest, indeed, was apprehensive lest the king come to the conclusion that Heliodorus had been the victim of foul play perpetrated by the Jews. Hence, he offered up a sacrifice for the man's recovery. As the high priest was performing the rites of atonement, the same young men dressed in the same garments reappeared to Heliodorus. Standing over him, they said, "Be very grateful to Onias the high priest, because for his sake the Lord has granted you your life. As for you, now that you have been scourged by an act from heaven, proclaim the majestic power of God to all." Having spoken, they disappeared. Ooh.
Spooky.
So obviously these guys are otherworldly beings.
Yeah, I think so.
It's the Watchers.
They're not the Watchers.
And a gold golem on a horse.
What's really weird is that there was no actual additional commentary for that.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm sure there's plenty in here.
So it was spread over 2 verses, I think.
The golden...
Yeah.
Man, it was a
Well,
long...
I can actually, while you try to find that, I can read this out. So some scholars have divided the narrative into 2 accounts, one with a horseman and the other with 2 young men. But the author may be displaying the power of God through various agents. So that was the sections there. It did
Check
seem-
out God's new avatars. Get them now in action figure form. They just have to have a whole bunch of different forms for God, or else we can't sell all these toys. I mean, what are we going to do with 2 guys with whips and a glowing dude in gold armor on a horse? I'm never going to sell these if we don't put them in the story somewhere.
Yeah, the only thing that the Hermenia commentary says on this is that it is not clear whether only Herodotus sees the 2 young men. His attendants have run away, and only he is left. And then on verses 27 and 28, rather than see the word suddenly as appropriate because the horse and rider have already appeared, one should see it as referring to Heliodorus kneeling over all of a sudden after being whipped. See, for example, Acts 28:6, where Paul has been bitten by a snake. The onlookers, after Paul is bitten by a snake, the onlookers want to see if he will swell up or fall down dead all of a sudden. So, not really much on those. I would love to know more about that. That kind of imagery.
It's just branding.
So, interest in the personal appearance and clothing of supernatural beings is common to both pagans and Jews. The narrative portion of the Hebrew Bible did not tell stories of manifest interventions against the enemies of Israel by such figures. Our writer here, rather, drew on Greek patterns such as those of Dionysus and Helicarnassus, although as a Jew he did not call the intervening figures gods. Though Jeremiah predicts, it goes on to say, both the author of the Common Source and Jason of Cyrene had lived under the Macedonian dynasties and could be expected to mount God's angel, if not God himself, on a horse. One motif here is surely borrowed from the Greeks and Macedonians, as Bickerman demonstrated in great detail, Studies 2, 178 through 80. In equestrian stunts, a horse can rear and strike with his forehoofs, but not in nature or in war. But Greek myths and Greek art teem with representations of gods and heroes mounted on horses who do so. Although the two angels are invisible to all but Heliodorus, they give him a real whipping. Bickerman has collected parallels for this motif in ancient miracle stories and Studies 2, 180 through 82.
So what's interesting on that, so in verse 32, the Hermenia commentary says this: the tricks of priests were often pointed out. In the second prefix letter to second Maccabees, their machinations in the death of Antiochus IV were noted. The story of Bel and the dragon shows priests being caught in their attempt to deceive. And Lucian of Samosata mocks the false god and the tricks set up by Alexander of Abuneuticus. Philo speaks of those who did not believe the biblical marvels. And then he also notes here, see also Dionysus of Helicarnassus.
Here's something really interesting from verse 31. Only here does this name for God, Hypsistos, appear in 2 Maccabees. Though also used by Jews, Deuteronomy 32:8, 2 Samuel 22:14, etc., it seems to have been an official designation used by pagans for the God of Israel, first Esdras 2:2, Dan 4:2, Aramaic Dan 3:32.
That's Daniel, by the way.
Yeah. On the other hand, pagans frequently used Hypsistos as an epithet of their own deities.
See, here's something weird, because I'm reading the Greek of that right now. So as with most miracle stories, the healer has to be approached. In this case, the high priest as mediator with the God of Israel is approached. Most high, and it's actually Hysistos, yeah, as a title for God is found in Hellenistic literature. In Ezekiel, the tragic poet, in Philo, the epic poet, in some wisdom texts in 3rd Maccabees, and frequently in the Septuagint, and also in Josephus. It was widely used as a title by both Jews and Gentiles, which is interesting.
So now I would say something a little, it's on that topic, but it's bizarre to me that there are many names for God, or, Yahweh or Elohim or whatever, that, they came from the religion itself, either changing a little, having a different pronunciation, time going by. So that's one way. And there's another way now that, you can get it from outsiders. You can have different names for the God from other people's cultures. And that's neat. And there was a third way, and I forgot it, but whatever.
Yeah, so they actually had a that kind of, you can kind of argue that happened with El and Yahweh as well, because
Look a precept.
Fantastic.
Duncan atheism.
Oh my God. So you can argue that happened with El and Yahweh, because Yahweh, while it being its own independent title for God, was later just identified with El. So that's why El and Elohim are used.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And
I guess that third way being that they kind of mix other cultures in over time.
Well, yeah,
to try to show God embodying the positions of them better.
Well, I think that's mostly just the historical situation there.
Sure. Sure, but that's another way that it seems to me that God gets a new name, is that he's like, oh, I'm better than Dagon, and so here's the name we'll use to show that, or whatever.
Well, I mean, yeah,
Baal or whoever I superimpose upon
Yeah.
as another naming metric for that.
I don't think I think it has less to do with the names that they use and more of the stories that they tell about these gods.
Right.
Like that's why you have the whole thing at Mount Carmel, and when the Philistines take the ark into the temple of Dagon, there's that whole thing. So like that's how you would provide that. So actually, on there is a note here on the last section about the healing.
There's still 5 verses before this section is done in the Goldstein version, or this chapter, rather.
Okay. I'm going to read out this section here. So in contrast to, because I just thought it was interesting, we might cover it at some point, but I don't know. In contrast to the story in 3rd Maccabees 1-2, where Ptolemy the 4th Philippator attempts to enter the Holy of Holies and is punished but does not repent, here Heliodorus recognizes the power of the deity. Such recognition of divine power by a former enemy is also found in Greek literature, as, for example, in the Lindos Chronicle, which portrays how before the Battle of Marathon, the Persian commander Dates was forced to proclaim the greatness of the goddess Athena through a miraculous thirst she sent on his forces as they besieged the Isle of Lindus. The author emphasizes that this miracle was no tricky ambush played on Heliodorus, but the work of God, by asserting that the high priest prayed for Heliodorus to assure that the king would not get the wrong impression about what had happened. So yeah, that makes sense, actually.
So is this like an alt account for Darth Dawkins?
Yeah, it's definitely Darth
Oh,
Dawkins.
amazing. Hey, man.
Well,
How many times?
It's weird. We have like one YouTube pre-sup who hangs out in the comments of different videos.
And we acknowledge, I read him. I don't want to say
no,
anything about it.
I like him. I like his presence.
Yes.
I enjoy what it brings to our chat.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for
That's true.
asking
Yeah,
us
that's a good
that
point.
question a lot.
Yeah.
But it's the same question that no one has an answer for that you would like.
Really, it's more that it's not appropriate for the shows
Stream.
that we're doing. But with that being said, I do look forward to seeing people talking to him in the comments.
Sure,
Yeah,
I
it's
could
fine.
always remark on it if it's really worth
Yeah.
my time, but it has not been. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, let me continue here. Thereupon, Heliodorus offered up a sacrifice to the Lord and made the most lavish of vows to the one who had preserved his life, and after greeting Onias, marched back with his army to the king. He bore witness to all concerning the acts of the supreme God, which he had seen with his own eyes. When the king asked Heliodorus what now was the right sort of man to send to Jerusalem, he replied, "If you have an enemy or plotter against your kingdom, send him there. He will come back to you scourged, if he survives at all, because a divine power truly surrounds the place. Indeed, he who dwells on high watches over that place and defends it, and smites and destroys those who come to do it injury." Such was the outcome of the affair of Heliodorus and the preservation of the treasury.
So on there's a note here about the sacrifice that he offered. So Heliodorus probably offered a sacrifice of thanksgiving and promised future offerings. An interesting case of a mediator praying on behalf of others is found in Exodus 32:10-14. There, God threatened to destroy Israel, but Moses interceded, using as an argument the worry that the Egyptians spread false stories about God. So God was propitiated? Is that it? I don't know. To preserve his people, just as God here preserves the life of Heliodorus. And there is actually an end note that I want to say.
Well, there's some notes in here, too, that I could go over.
Sure, while I pull that up.
Yeah. So, about this last section here. As befits a work of Onias IV, version B here tells of the patriotism of Onias III. The king's agent had been physically beaten, though witnesses saw no assailant. Jews and pagans might believe in the miraculous power of God, but Celsus could be as skeptical of the God of Jerusalem as Daniel was of Bel in the apocryphal story. The high priest offered an expiatory sacrifice for Heliodorus. In the Hebrew Bible, sin and guilt offerings are brought only by the individual or corporate sinner, though Jason of Cyrene knows of sin offerings on behalf of the dead. We do not know what system of Jewish law Onias followed. According to the rabbinic law, a non-Jew could not bring a sin or guilt offering, but he could bring a burnt offering. And Onias or Heliodorus' friends could bring a burnt offering on Heliodorus' behalf. See Job 1:5. Such a burnt offering could secure atonement, Leviticus 1:4. The requirements of laying hands upon the animal did not apply to a non-Jew. See Goy from the Talmudic Encyclopedia 5 from 1953 in Hebrew. In addition to the burnt offerings, some rabbinic authorities held that pagans could bring thank offerings. Heliodorus also vowed to give very great offerings in the future. The writer here makes an artistic contrast with earlier verses where Heliodorus, the powerful agent of the king on a mission of confiscation, is warmly greeted on his arrival by Onias. Here the chastened Heliodorus, after making great donations, greets Onias and departs. The king did not abandon his project until Heliodorus demonstrated its impossibility. Kings get rid of troublesome persons by sending them on missions sure to prove fatal, both in Greek myths, e.g. in the story of Bellerophon, and in biblical narratives. See 2 Samuel 11:14 through 27. And also from the end here.
So much at the end here.
Yeah. At the very end here, there is a linguistic note about he who dwells on high watches over that place and defends it. It says, watches over, epoptes esti, may echo, the Lord watches over mankind at Greek Zechariah 9:1 and God's utterance, quote, for now I see with mine own eyes, after his promise to prevent exactors of money from coming against the Jews, Zechariah 9:8. Similarly, those who come may echo one who marches to and fro at Zechariah 9:8. So, I don't know. That's interesting, I thought.
There is
because we haven't done Zechariah. Yeah.
Yeah. There is an endnote here on. Actually, there was an interesting thing on the Tobiad family in general that I thought was pretty cool. On Heliodorus' arrival in Jerusalem, the high priest accused Simon of misrepresentation, explaining that apart from properly accountable temple funds, the only other monies were private deposits held for widows and orphans, and the personal funds of Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, the son of the Tobiad family. And then kind of an endnote here. Joseph had been a tax collector for Ptolemy III of Egypt. And here's something that's cool. The ruins of a palace or temple associated with this family still exist at Iraq El Emir, 20 kilometers west of modern Amman. The name Tobiah is inscribed beside two cave entrances on the cliff face nearby, which I thought was very neat. And then on the section as a whole, kind of closing it out. So far, 2nd Maccabees tells a totally credible story. I don't think so. Not a totally credible story.
These unnamed gods in golden armor showed up and beat the shit out of this dude.
Yeah, but because it was divine healing, then kind of from that, maybe these beings were also meant to be divine.
You know what I'm gonna say? I'm gonna say if any part of that story was based on historical fact, what happened there is that the guy had an epileptic seizure. He fell down on the ground.
Well, maybe 2 people did beat him up.
Maybe 2 people did beat him up, but
Yeah.
but they were invisible to other people.
But the thing is, we don't actually know that, though. I know that.
Well, Goldstein.
his
holds
commentary
that.
said it, but also Doran's commentary said the opposite. We don't know if it was that anyone could see it or not because the army had run away.
But assuming that they can't see it, then what's clearly happening is this guy's like shaking, and then he falls to the ground, and he continues.
Yeah, I mean, I know
that's what an epileptic seizure looks like.
Yeah, that's true. Although the closing note here, it does go on. There's more than that. So far, 2nd Maccabees tells a totally credible story, which may conceal deeper political rivalries below the surface. Onias and Hyrcanus probably had Egyptian rather than Seleucid sympathies, and Simon may have been exploiting them. However, verses 3:14 through 21 evidently convey an overly dramatic picture of the response in Jerusalem, and verses 22 through 34 resolve the crisis by divine intervention. The text appears to combine 2 versions of the story, and he notes actually something by Doran that we don't have. In one version, Heliodorus and his bodyguards are confronted by a magnificent rearing horse and a terrifying golden armored rider. The author of 2nd Maccabees promises such appearances and makes regular use of the apparition of horse and rider with golden weapons or accoutrements. And apparently that also happens in chapter 5, 10, and 11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember this happening a few times.
No, it didn't pop up yet. This was the first instance of it.
Yeah, I mean, when I've previously.
Oh, okay, right. In the other version, 326, Heliodorus is beaten unconscious by 2 strong young men who reappear, and we already went over that one, to tell Heliodorus that he has been saved by Onias' concern for him and then vanish. This latter story may be nearer the truth. The high priest, perhaps rightly, feared the king's suspicions of foul play, duly prompted by Simon. Onias plays an important role as an intercessor. The spiritual quality of an intercessor was important. We can cross-reference 15:14 later on in Jeremiah 15:1. And as high priest, like any priest, he could make expiation by means of a sin offering for the unintentional sin of a ruler. So that was kind of the closing note there. But other than that...
Oh, man, there's a bunch of really good political maps and things in the back of this book.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't see those before.
Yeah, why weren't we looking at this is
a lot of books that you guys
Down
have
to
gone over
rivers
have had
and
maps.
everything.
In
and
the
then
back somewhere.
you just miss them until it's way past relevant. And it's kind of funny.
Great.
There's a good amount of them, too, yeah.
We should have been referencing. Yeah, this is areas important during the last campaigns of Antiochus IV. Right? Good stuff. Okay.
So I'm going to give you some of these commentaries.
You do that, and viewers, if you're enjoying the stream so far, then give us a like, share it with your friends,
I mean, you're all quarantined, so why not?
Yep. You're all stuck here
and
with
so
us
are
anyway.
Now Nightbot's going crazy.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Nightbot, for finally popping up.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, anyways, how about we get into chapter 4, shall we?
Yeah, just let me get open all the right
Yeah.
areas.
There's quite a bit.
There's a bunch of books in front of me,
I know.
and they're all like, okay, what if I do this?
All right, you got a nice little fort there.
It's coming together.
It's come together.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
We have told how Simon acted as an informer against the money and against his own country. This same Simon spread slanders about Onias, declaring that Onias it was who had incited Heliodorus and had been the author of the evil affair. So he's accusing him now.
Mm-hmm. So there's quite a bit of commentary.
I'm sure there is.
Oh, man. And for some reason, the Hermenia has chapter 4 in like the middle.
Yeah, no, chapter 4 is like it has the last verse of chapter 3, and then chapter 4 begins with it. So it is a little strange.
Yeah. Well, so where do I start here? Chapter 4 is perhaps the section of the book most discussed by scholars because it contains much information about the political background of the Maccabean rebellion not given in First Maccabees. In the absence of independent sources offering a cross-check, the historian's problem is how to assess its accuracy and allow for its particular bias. In verse 1, the author almost certainly means that Simon, as chief administrator of the temple, was slandering Onias, the high priest, to his fellow Jews, probably to turn the spotlight from himself. Onias, realizing that the governor Apollonius, the description son of Menelaus, did you get to that yet?
No, not yet.
Well, it's given here. And he supports Simon.
We're going to get to that in just a little bit.
But there's also a bit in here that says, an overview of the thing. The attack on Jerusalem comes from both internal and external forces, but this is really talking about stuff that happens later on. For some reason, they grouped in 4:1 through 6:17.
Yeah, because that was like their division, I guess. I know, it's nuts. But I can continue reading while you find whatever.
Yeah.
He had the audacity to call the benefactor of the city and protector of his countrymen and zealous defender of the laws a plotter against the commonwealth. The hostility grew so extreme that murders were perpetrated by one of Simon's trusted henchmen. And that's verse 2. That's verse 3, actually.
In 3:4 through 6, Simon seemed to work alone. Here he is pictured as head of a faction. The unity of the city, so dramatically depicted in 2 Maccabees 3, has broken down and the violence of factional strife has emerged. We do not know how long this factional violence lasted. The evil that Simon did is literally the evil of Simon. The genitive is a genitive of origin. It also says here, Simon is shown to be the opposite of Onias, as he instigates murder, which goes against the commandments of God.
Oh, no.
The local rivalry takes on larger dimensions, however, as the Seleucid authorities become involved. The new governor of Coele, Syria, and Phoenicia does not assume the passive attitude of the previous governor, but actively supports Simon, which we'll get into in a moment. It is not known why or what benefit a governor might gain from fomenting civil unrest.
Perceiving how dangerous was Simon's feud and how Apollonius, son of Menelaus, the governor of Coele and Phoenicia, was involved in making Simon's wickedness still worse, Onias journeyed to the king. His purpose was not to bring charges against his fellow Jews, but to look to the collective and individual interests of all the people. Indeed, he saw that without provident intervention by the king, the commonwealth could never more have peace, and Simon would never desist from his madness.
Okay.
When Seleucus passed away, and Antiochus, called Epiphanes. So I think there should be a note on him, I'm sure. He pops up as the main villain of the book of Daniel. Antiochus, called Epiphanes, succeeded to the throne. Jason, Onias' brother, usurped the high priesthood. He did so by presenting a petition in which he offered the king 360 talents, plus 80 talents of other revenue. In addition, he promised to pay 150 talents if he should be granted by virtue of his office the power to establish a gymnasium and an ephebic organization, and to draw up the list of the Antiochians in Jerusalem. The king consented. So, apparently what's going on here is that it might be help for an election, kind of like trying to buy, quote unquote, the election. It kind of seems like he's bribing Antiochus here. That is really that's what it looks like. And the building of an ephebic organization, I think there might be something on that. In the gymnasium in general.
There's a few things that I want to go over here. So, in 175 BC, Heliodorus killed Seleucus IV, and Seleucus' brother Antiochus intrigued his way into the kingdom. See Daniel 11:21. Bypassing the real heir, Seleucus' son Demetrius, who was a hostage in Rome, and in turn assassinating Heliodorus, his subsequent deputy Andronicus, and Seleucus' other sons, Antiochus' own nephew and co-regent Antiochus. He took his title Epiphanes in 173 or 172 BC. Onias' brother Jason, the name here was adopted by the Jews as a Greek version of the Hebrew for Joshua, approached the king, whether by letter or in person is uncertain. The Greek could suggest either, offering to increase the annual tribute from 300 talents of silver annually. It says, Second Maccabees suggests that this proposal came from Jason alone. First Maccabees attributes it to certain renegades and some of the people. So we can go a little more into this in the NIV commentary. So all in all, Jason promises 590 talents of silver, quite a sizable amount for a small country like Judea. The annual payment imposed by the Romans as a heavy indemnity on the Seleucids was 1,000 talents of silver. And so this extra money is a significant amount. The last installment of the indemnity was to be paid in 173 BCE. Besides becoming high priest, what Jason asked for in exchange for the money has been the subject of long scholarly debate. The gymnasium was a unique feature of Greek life. Originally designed for athletic activity, it usually consisted of a running track and a wrestling area with perhaps jumping pits and areas for throwing the javelin or discus. Adjacent would be buildings for dressing, bathing, storing oil, etc. Later, gymnasia became centers of both physical and intellectual training, with halls for lectures on music, literature, and philosophy. The exact chronology of this development, however, is unclear, and it is unknown how much of such intellectual training would have been connected with a gymnasium in a city like Jerusalem in the early 2nd century BCE. The same uncertainty surrounds the words translated as body of youth in the NRSV. These were boys who had reached the age of puberty at Athens for a short period of time in the late 4th century. All young men aged 18 to 20, the ephebes, underwent a 2-year compulsory military training. Such military exercises as archery and the use of siege engines were still being done by ephebes in the late 2nd century.
And I think the ephebes thing is young men, boys, yeah.
But few families could afford their sons not working for 2 years. So this training period, like most education, was primarily for the sons of rich families. The ephebes, though, through their training, became involved in the public life of a city, its religious festivals and processions. The reader needs to keep in mind that there was no core curriculum for education in the Hellenistic world, and education was primarily preparation to be a citizen of a particular city with all its particular religious and community responsibilities. The physical exercises, of course, would be common to all, and so cities could compete against each other in games. While we cannot be sure what intellectual training took place at the gymnasium in Jerusalem, except no doubt that Greek was taught, the physical training already showed that the people desired to be part of a wider world. Outfitting and maintaining such an athletic facility would have been expensive, and thus one gets a sense of the wealth and the wealth of the priestly families. The exact location of the gymnasium is unknown. According to 412, the gymnasium is under the citadel. If one locates the citadel on the southeastern hill, then the gymnasium would have been either between the city of David and on the temple, or in a broad ravine, the Tyropoion, which separated the lower city from the upper city.
So there is a note here on the figure that Jason offers as well. To later generations, inflation made the figures here seem too small. For 300 here, the Latin reads 600, and at 417, Jason is said to have offered an annual payment of 3,660 talents. So it's quite a lot.
What verse are you on right now?
Well, no, I was just going back to the one about how much he offered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's just different in different manuscripts.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, though, there is one thing here about the gymnasium. So a gymnasium in a Hellenistic Greek city occupied a prominent site, often near the civic center or a temple. In accordance with that pattern, the citadel here, Acropolis, is either the Temple Mount or the Citadel Hill, the Acra, which lay just to the north. So that's the note there. Let's continue, shall we?
Yep. What verse are you on right now?
In the middle of verse 10.
Okay.
On taking office, Jason immediately brought his fellow Jews over to the Greek style of life. Ooh, that's not good. He's Hellenizing.
So there's some notes here. The change of Jerusalem into a Greek city. It's longer than that. Okay. So there's a big note on verse 4:9.
Okay.
It says, the verse has been variously translated to enroll the people of Jerusalem as Antiochians, i.e. citizens of Antioch, to enroll the Antiochians in Jerusalem. Who and what are these Antiochians? 4 possibilities have been suggested. That the Hellenized Jews would be made citizens of Antioch in Syria. That Antiochus IV had set up a new republic like the Roman one, and that its citizens were to be called Antiochians. That a Hellenistic corporation could have been set up within Jerusalem, and its members called Antiochians. That Jerusalem itself would now be called Antioch in Jerusalem, and its citizens called Antiochians. The first 3 are unlikely. As regards the first proposition, even the king could not force a city to give citizenship en bloc to citizens of another city. As for the second option, the evidence we do have suggests that Antiochus IV supported local traditions and not that he sought to make a republic. Against the third position, Antiochy never refers to a corporation, but to citizenship. Even the last suggestion has its problems. First Maccabees does not mention such a change in name and status, nor does the author of Second Maccabees, even though he knows how to protest a name change, complaining openly about it. Nevertheless, mainly ancient cities received new Greek names, and this seemed to be the best explanation of this verse. Did this name change have juridical or constitutional implications? Jerichover argues that the only ones who received ephebic training could be citizens, and that since Jason controlled the enrollment of the gymnasium, he would now be able to decide who became a citizen of his city. Yet we have no evidence that in the Hellenistic period a city's name meant constitutional change as well, or that undergoing ephebic training was the only way to become a citizen. Perhaps
that would be kind of ridiculous if that was the only way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps all all one should say is that to enroll the people of Jerusalem as Antiochenes means simply that the name of the city was henceforth to be Antioch in Jerusalem, and that this does not imply either Jason's control of who was a citizen or a constitutional change in Jerusalem. The change of Jerusalem into a Greek city also implies that Jason wanted to integrate Jerusalem into the Seleucid Empire, particularly since his position depended on Antioch IV's favor. Why would Antiochus have so readily granted the request? He always needed the money for lavish expenditure, but perhaps just as important, it strengthened his southern region near the border with Egypt at a time of increasing tension.
That was a very long and helpful note.
Yeah.
So, no, he's bringing over the Jews to the Greek style of life.
Mhm.
He cast away the humane royal concessions gained for the Jews by John, the father of the ambassador Eupolemus, who negotiated the treaty of friendship and alliance with the Romans. Overthrowing the civic institutions of the Torah, Jason brought in new usages, which were contrary to the law.
So the existing royal concessions for the Jews set aside by Jason are probably those referred to in Antiochus III's letter to Ptolemy, governor of Coele, Syria and Phoenicia, preserved in Josephus's Antiquities 138 through 44. The most important concession being that all the members of the nation shall have a form of government in accordance with the laws of their country.
Indeed, he took pleasure in founding a gymnasium beneath the very citadel and in making the education of the noblest adolescent boys consist of submission to the broad-brimmed Greek hat.
So the citadel is the Acra, and there was a note here about
the Greek hat?
The Greek hat.
Yeah.
So the Greek hat, which was a broad-brimmed hat worn to protect them from the sun, it was said to have been similar to the hat worn by Hermes, the god of athletics. But I'm pretty sure Hermes is the god of more than just athletics.
Yeah, definitely more than just that.
Yeah.
Either way.
I gotta go fast, right?
The enormous wickedness of the impious Jason, no true high priest he. So he's not a real high priest.
Yeah.
He's an evil one. And the thing is, Jason is, was he from the line of Simon, right? Or was he, no. Oh, no. He was Onias' brother.
Yeah.
Okay, so, right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird then, because Onias was so good.
Also, about this Greek thing, there's no evidence that Jewish laws ceased to be constitutional until Antiochus IV's decree in 168 or 167 BC. Second Maccabees shows little evidence of new customs contrary to the law. It is unlikely that Jews, especially the priests, exercised naked in Jerusalem. Presumably, those who tried to conceal their circumcision were preparing for participation in Hellenistic games abroad.
Yeah, so that's actually something we're about to get into.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, yeah, he calls Jason impious, saying, yeah, he's not a real high priest.
Yeah.
Good old no true Scotsman. Yeah, so the enormous wickedness of the impious Jason, no true high priest he, brought it about that the aping of Greek manners reached a peak, and the adoption of Gentile ways a height, such that the priests were no longer eager to perform their duties at the altar, but made light of the temple, and neglected the sacrifices in their haste after the going sounded, calling them to participate in the illicit entertainment in the wrestling yard. So apparently this new Greek way of life being, something akin to the Olympics.
Right, wrestling while naked.
Yeah.
But, yeah, here it says that it was highly unlikely that they did so, which I just read.
Yeah.
It says Second Maccabees probably reflects the feelings of the conservative Jew confronted by the more open Hellenistic city ethos. The author uses or even invents a neologism.
Yes, this is something super interesting. So go ahead.
Hellenismos. Quote, imitation of the Greeks.
What
end
verse is
quote.
that? Does it
It's
say?
in verse 13.
Verse 13. Okay.
Yeah. To describe what he meant. Yeah. So that's interesting. He invented a word.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you keep reading that, it's a lot like the word that means Jewish. So if at least etymologically speaking, etymologically speaking.
Etymologically.
Yeah, etymologically speaking. When it comes to the word Jewish, the same guys, was Jewish first used in First Maccabees, or was it in here in Second Maccabees?
It was in Second Maccabees.
It was in Second? Okay. So then the same author would have also coined the term Hellenismos, or however you're supposed to pronounce it. Because the other one is Judaismos, which is Judaism.
All right.
So if we're supposed to take Hellenismos as Greek-like, then we're supposed to take Judaismos as Jew-like or Jewish.
Right.
Which in that time is not a slur.
Well, yeah, it's not a slur now. Jewish?
Don't be Jewish could be considered a slur. If don't be.
If you're an asshole about it, it's different. But the word
right, I know,
Jewish
I
isn't a
understand.
slur.
No, it isn't. But I'm saying in our connotative, it can be. It wasn't ever then. So there you go.
It has been used as a slur.
It has been. It has been used as a slur.
Sure,
You have to admit that.
But
it
it
by
is
itself.
not inherently a slur.
No.
Yeah. So that it's just interesting that etymology there. Either way.
Yeah.
So, some wrestling in the yard. Setting at naught their hereditary distinctions, they put the highest value on Greek honors. For that very reason, grievous troubles came upon them. The Greeks, whose way of life they admired, and whom they wished to ape in every way, became their enemies and their executors of their punishment. It is no light matter to be impious toward the laws of God. That, however, will be seen from the events which followed.
What
So
verse are you at?
that was 17 I just ended, but as we can see, we kind of have the theme of like the wealth of the nation depends on how good the leader of it is.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, this is the priest, right? So this isn't even like the king. This is a priest. So,
But the priest is a leader of the community.
yeah, exactly. He is a leader. So it depends. The well-being of the Jews depends on who their leader is at the time, and that theme pops up all the time.
Especially because their leader has commanded their military.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how it worked with this, if they had their own.
They seem to have control over infrastructure, trade,
They have
everything.
control over a lot.
They have a lot.
They're pretty autonomous.
Yeah, but they're still a vassal.
Right.
Yeah.
Either way, that guy in charge, if he didn't get rid of the high places, damn him and such.
Yeah.
When the quinquennial games were being celebrated at Tyre in the presence of the king, I'm guessing that's every 4 years.
Yep.
Or is that every 5? Because it's
Quinn, that'd be quid would be for 5, I think. Quinquennial.
I have no idea.
I don't know either. It's a weird
I would think it'd be
phrase.
every 4 years.
I assume it's 4, yes.
The abominable Jason sent a delegation representing the Antiochians from Jerusalem, bearing 300 drachmas to pay for the sacrifice to Heracles, which is, of course, Hercules.
Right. So here it says the new situation introduced by Jason is illustrated by the behavior of the Jewish envoys at the games held at Tyre in honor of the god Melkart,
Yeah,
Greek
so
Hercules, to whom the competitors would sacrifice on the opening day. The date is unknown, but it is probably between 174 and 172 BC. These envoys are Antiochian cities of Jerusalem, but scruples to offer sacrifice to Melkart and offer the 300 drachmas. A drachma was the daily wage for a workman to the city for its shipbuilding. Jason's personal policy is unknown. There's no evidence that he quarreled with the envoy's decision.
The bearers themselves, however, decided not to use the money for a sacrifice, since that was not proper, but to donate it to be spent for another purpose. Jason, in sending the delegation, had intended that the money be contributed for the sacrifice to Hercules. No, Jason! But because of the bearers, it was contributed for the fitting out of triremes, which are ships.
Yeah, they're ships. About these quinquennial games, they were held after 4 years at the beginning of the 5th year. There are several possibilities as to the origin of these games at Tyre, as Goldstein has noted. 1. The games originated in an ancient festival. When Alexander the Great captured Tyre in 332 BCE, he found a delegation from Carthage trapped there during the 7-month siege. Its members had come to participate in an ancient festival for the Phoenician god Melkart. However, Curtius states that this was an annual event. 2. Alexander celebrated games at Tyre after the capturing of the city. Heliodorus is used as a source. The games celebrated the beginning of the Tyrian era in 275/274 BCE. Whatever their origin, the games must be placed before the replacement of Jason as high priest by Menelaus after 3 years, since Antiochus IV came to power in 175 BCE, and Jason's appointment followed after this date. The Tyrian games must fall before 173/172 BCE, possibly in 174 BCE. Jason thus wasted no time in exhibiting his desire for closer ties with neighboring cities, as well as his loyalty to the king. The presence of Antiochus IV at the games is no doubt explained by his desire both to show himself in control of the kingdom after taking it over in an uncertain fashion, and to make clear to the Ptolemies, who disputed Seleucid claims to quell Assyria, that he was master there.
Through the mission to Egypt of Apollonius, son of Menestheus, to attend the protoclesia of King Philometor, Antiochus learned that Philometor was now hostile to his kingdom. Accordingly, he took measures for his own safety. Thus it was that he came to Joppe and then went to Jerusalem. He was sumptuously greeted by Jason and the Jerusalemites, and he was brought into the city with a torchlight parade and shouts of applause. Thereafter, in the same manner, he and his army marched off to Phoenicia. 3 years had passed.
Well, when just a bit before 3 years passed.
Sure.
Eupolemus attempted to identify Solomon as the origin of the well-known pillar in Tyre, mentioning by the Greek historian Herodotus as being in a temple to Hercules. Eupolemus thus connects Solomon with votive offerings in a temple of Zeus. Immediately following this fragment of Eupolemus's work in Eusebius is a fragment from another Jewish author, Theophilus, who insists that Solomon simply sent the remaining gold to Sauron. Sauron then commissioned a full-length gold statue of
Sauron?
his daughter.
No, kidding.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
he wants
placed
his ring back.
the golden pillar near it as a covering for the statue. We know nothing about Theophilus except that he wrote this fragment. We do not know when or where Theophilus wrote. We do see him, however, as trying to distance Solomon from any connection with this foreign cult. It is interesting to note how the Septuagint?
Is it LXX?
LXX, yeah.
Yeah, Septuagint.
Translates Exodus 22:28 as "you shall not revile God." The Hebrew term for God, Elohim, there is a plural noun, and the Greek translator has translated as plural, "you shall not revile the gods." Does this translation imply that the gods of other nations could be honored, but only as subordinate to the supreme God, the God of Israel?
Well, the thing is, for a good while there, Israel was
by necessity.
They were henotheistic
Yeah.
for a good while.
Yeah, but
I don't think that's what's going on here, although they do seem to be partaking in these things. Though there was, I forget who it was, but there was a sacrifice to another god in the Deuteronomistic history, and it was, the thing is, the king who did it was good, but he was tricking the other priests, like the priests of the enemy god, but he still went through with the sacrifice, which I feel like that should be theologically a problem. Like, yeah, he ended up killing them, but he also performed a sacrifice to this other god.
Right.
Yeah, so I would think that would be an issue.
It
Triggered.
You would think, but I mean, you got to keep in mind here that he's also sending drachmas. He's not sending huge amounts of animals to burn.
Yeah.
So maybe there's an exception for like financial offerings.
I don't know. I doubt it.
Sure. Either way. 3 years had passed when Jason sent Menelaus, brother of the aforementioned Simon, as bearer of the money to the king, and as his agent for executing royal decisions on pressing matters. On being introduced to the king, Menelaus magnified his own importance by giving the impression that he was a man of authority, and by adding 300 talents of silver to Jason's bid. He gained for himself the high priesthood. See, he outbid him for the priesthood. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it says, did Menelaus present to the king a one-time offering of 300 talents? Or did he offer to increase the annual tax by raising it either from 440 to 740 talents by 68%, or from 360 to 660 talents by 80%? Such an increase in annual tax would not have made him friends at home. In 427, Menelaus is said not to have made regular payments of the money promised, but this statement could refer just as well to the payment over time of 300 talents as to the annual payment of taxes.
He came home holding the royal decrees, but with no qualifications for the high priesthood, possessing only the temper of a cruel tyrant and the passions of a savage beast.
Yeah, here it says the author dehumanizes Menelaus and suggests by the use of the term orders or instructions
And he's just a pawn.
and tola, that Menelaus is but a puppet of the king.
Thus Jason, who had usurped his brother's office, saw his own usurped by another and was forced to flee to the Amanitis. Menelaus took over the office, but failed completely to make the promised regular payments to the king. Okay, so it does seem like it was regular payments. Hence, Sostratos, the commander of the citadel, whose duty it was to collect the money, repeatedly demanded payment. As a result, both men were summoned by the king. Menelaus left as substitute high priest his brother. Hold on, I got this. Lysimachus. And Sostratus as his deputy left Crates, the commander of the Cypriot mercenaries. At the very time of this agitation, there were uprisings in the cities of Tarsus and Malus, because they had been given as a gift to Antiochus, the king's concubine. That's a weird structured sentence.
In the Hermenia version, it says, while such things were at issue, it happened that the citizens of Tarsus and Malus rebelled because they were being given to Antiochus, the king's concubine, as a grant.
So wait, was it that Antiochus was the king's concubine? Or was one of the cities, I'm so confused.
Okay.
Bad phrasing.
So if I were to say, for example, Pyongyang is Donald Trump's bitch, then that would probably
Okay.
have a similar connotation.
Sure. Huh, that's interesting though. Were they doing that back then?
I don't, probably.
Someone had to start doing it somewhere.
I mean,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, so I have a note here on this. The Seleucid kings ruled their realm by right of conquest and had the power to dispose at pleasure of subject communities by gift or sale. The citizens of the two cities probably found Antiochus's gift of them in affront to their pride. Their purses probably would not suffer if the revenues of the towns went to the woman instead of to the king. But the woman also acquired the king's power to intervene in the affairs of the cities, and the citizens could think the caprice of the, or caprice, I don't know, of the woman to be more demeaning than the whims of Antiochus IV.
Mhm.
So he did sell the towns to a woman.
So about Tarsus and Malice, it says the authority of the king in Greek cities, particularly those in strategic Asia Minor, varied from city to city, but in general, the Seleucids showed a certain respect for the independence of these cities, for Antiochus to summarily hand them over to his concubine would have been seen as disrespectful.
Yeah, it's like,
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
I've got plenty of cities. I'm gonna give one to my my hooker here.
Oh, hold on. So the name here, it's Antiochus, but it's spelled with an I at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes way more sense.
Different guy.
Okay. Different. No, that's the name of the woman then.
It says
That's the king's concubine.
It says in Eerdmans, cities were often given by patrons to clients. Demetrius I offered Ptolemaeus to Jerusalem in 1 Maccabees 10:39. Alexander Ballas gave Ekron to Jonathan in 1 Maccabees 10:89. And Mark Antony gave Jericho to Cleopatra.
Yeah, so this happened a lot.
Yeah.
The king, in great haste, came to put down the revolt. He left as his deputy Andronicus, a man of high prestige. Menelaus believed that here was a favorable opportunity. He purloined some of the gold vessels. I have not heard the word purloined in a long ass time.
I haven't heard it.
I've heard it once, I think.
I've seen the Pokemon called
Yeah,
Purloin.
yeah, that's true.
This guy, this Andronicus,
Mhm.
there's a note here. Someone named Andronicus is said by Hellenistic historians to have murdered the son of Seleucus IV, who seems to have been co-regent with Antiochus IV prior to Antiochus's rise to power. The death of Seleucus' son is dated to July/August 170 BCE from the Babylonian king list. It seems likely that the same Andronicus is meant in both cases. Perhaps Antiochus IV took the opportunity of Onias' murder to do away with an embarrassing accomplice, although Antiochus IV is shown by the author as being concerned only with the death of Onias and is extremely moved by it.
Reuben?
Yeah.
I think you should breathe.
Okay. I'm breathing.
So much
Okay.
reading from you today.
Well, that was also very
it's
fast.
stuff that you underlined.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, all this stuff is important.
Yeah.
So, anyways, Menelaus believed that here was a favorable opportunity. He purloined some of the gold vessels of the temple, and he made a present of them to Andronicus. In fact, he had sold other vessels to buyers in Tyre and the neighboring cities. Onias, fully informed of Menelaus's acts, withdrew to a place of asylum at Daphne by Antioch and denounced him. Thereupon, Menelaus took Andronicus aside privately and begged him to do away with Onias. Brazen in treachery, Andronicus went to Onias, accepted his right hand, and gave him his own in oath. Though Onias held him in suspicion, Andronicus induced him to come out of his place of asylum, and then, with no respect for justice, immediately did away with him.
So It is usually assumed that the incident of 439 through, well, we're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
But in here, it says, the story of the murder of Onias III by Andronicus brims with pathos, recounting the dastardly murder and the appropriate punishment of the murderer is the main concern of the author, so that he even neglects to inform the reader why Menelaus had originally been brought before the king.
Yeah.
The author leads his audience on with the intimate details of Menelaus' treachery, but explains neither how he knows these details nor why Menelaus is not inculpated with Andronicus. The inquiring reader would also like to know why such a high-ranking personage as Andronicus, the deputy of the king, would be so in the power of a petty prince like the Jewish high priest that even for a bribe he would violate the laws of asylum and commit such treachery. The author ignores such questions as he focuses on the treacherous deed instigated by Menelaus with the corrupting power of money. There is no convincing reason to doubt that Onias died in Antioch. There is a basic confusion in Josephus. In Jewish war, Onias flees to Egypt, while in the Antiquities of the Jews, Onias dies before Menelaus becomes high priest. The account in 2 Maccabees, Onias goes to the king before Jason becomes high priest and ultimately dies in Antioch.
And those two works were both written by Josephus before.
Yes.
Yeah, so interesting.
It appears to hang it together.
As a result, not only Jews, but many from other nationalities were scandalized and outraged over the wicked murder of the man. On the king's return from the regions of Cilicia, the Jews of the city, supported in their indignation by the Greeks, presented a petition to the effect that Onias had been killed without justification. Deeply perturbed and touched with pity, Antiochus shed tears over the upright character and altogether orderly life of the departed. And that's something that Antiochus would not have done in First Maccabees, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
What
yeah.
verse was that?
37.
37.
Passionately incensed, he forthwith stripped Andronicus of his purple and tore off his clothes, and after parading him around the entire city, brought him to the spot where he had committed the sacrilege against Onias. There he removed the murderer from the world, and thus the Lord repaid him with the punishment he deserved. So they humiliated him, and obviously he's no longer royalty.
Mm-hmm. Remove from the world is another euphemism for kill. The image.
Oh, wow, really? I didn't know that.
The image may derive from mourning rites where women would discard their jewelry.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, back in the city, many sacred articles had been stolen by Lysimachus with the connivance of Menelaus. When reports of the matter spread to the countryside, the people massed against. This is always such a difficult one for me. Lysimachus.
Is this 39 now?
Yes.
Tell me when you get to the end of 42.
Okay. By that time, many gold vessels had already been sent abroad. Confronted by the rising of the populace and their surge of indignation, Lysimachus armed some 3,000 men and wickedly took the offensive. In command was a certain Aranos, a man advanced equally in age and in madness.
That's a wonderful statement.
I love it.
We should make that a t-shirt. Advanced in age, advanced equally in age and in madness. That's wonderful.
I love it.
Is there any commentary on that?
What verse is that?
That was 40. Yeah, that was 40.
That was 40. Okay, 40. Bar Kokhba accepts the reliability of the figure of 3,000, a considerable force. Faced with such an angry mob, Lysimachus and his followers apparently panicked and attacked first. The phrase is literally began unjust hands. Such an attack from Homer through Virgil, was always seen as treacherous. The identity of Ouranos is not known, but the author derides his folly as precipitating the clash. Ouranos is said to be foolish, as was Simon, and later Alcimus and Nicanor. The description of Ouranos as an old man but foolish contrasts also with the descriptions of Onias and Eleazar. But here in the Hermenia version, it says, the one who started it was a certain Ouranos, a man advanced in age but no less in folly.
Oh, okay. I like Madness more.
Madness is way better.
I don't know if that would be more accurate. Does he have a textual commentary for that? It would be in the translation section. Okay. Yeah, it would be right next to
like a footnote.
Yeah, for 41 or 40 there. So cuz that's sad.
Wait. The Lucianic manuscripts as well as the Latin Syriac give the name as Tyrannos.
Oh, okay. So that's the only note there. All right.
Yep, that's the only note.
Unless
there's one in Goldstein.
I'll have to check that, but I'll check that at the end of 42.
Yeah.
When the people saw Lysimachus's attack, some snatched up stones, others heavy pieces of wood, and still others the dust and ashes that lay at hand. Wildly they hurled them at Lysimachus's men. In this manner they wounded many of them, shot others down, and routed the whole force. They did away with the temple robber himself at the treasury. And that's the end of 42 there.
Okay. It's usually assumed that the incidents of 439 through 42 took place in Menelaus' absence in Syria. The text does not say this, but rather suggests that Lysimachus was his brother's agent in continuing series of sacrilegious acts. Menelaus' complicity was known, that the temple robber, apparently but not explicitly Lysimachus, was killed near the temple treasury in the women's court of the temple suggests that Lysimachus was attacked in an enclosed space, which may help explain why the crowd, with only stones, blocks of wood, and ashes from the altar fire, could put to flight armed soldiers. Even so, 3,000 men seems excessive. The author never misses an opportunity to improve the story. From this commentary, the events narrated here stand in sharp contrast to what occurred earlier in 2 Maccabees chapter 3. Onias had protected the money deposited in the temple, but Lysimachus sells the temple vessels. The people had gathered around the high priest Onias in sympathy. Here they accused Lysimachus. Earlier, the action was against outsiders. Now it is an internal conflict.
So sadly, Goldstein does not have a note on the madness thing, which is really what we're wondering about.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, what a bummer. Anyways, these events became the basis for a suit against Menelaus. When the king came down to Tyre, 3 men sent by the Council of Elders argued the case in his presence. Menelaus had all but lost the contest when he promised considerable sums of money to the Ptolemy son of Dorymenes to have him win the king over. So, once again, tries bribery. He was the one who did the bribery before in the chapter, right?
Yes. Yeah. There's a bit here. These verses, you're in 43 now?
That was the one that I'm in right now is 45.
Okay, well, 43 through 50 discusses the last of the 4 incidents involving Menelaus prior to Antioch IV's incursion into Egypt. The scene is shifted from Antioch to Tyre. As noted before, the death of Andronicus occurred in late 170 BCE. At this time, war between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies was imminent, And they both sent embassies to Rome in the winter of 170/169 BCE from Polybius. So it is understandable that Antiochus should have come toward his southern border and be at Tyre. It is understandable that Antiochus would want stability to reign in his kingdom, yada, yada, yada. The author, however, shows no concern for these larger dynastic issues, but focuses on Menelaus' use of bribery. It is noteworthy that the author assumes that the king would have acted justly and was deterred only by the bad advice of his bribed counselor. It's difficult to imagine how Menelaus could have bribed Ptolemy during the trial, but there may have been a break in the deliberations.
During the trial, he's like, well, I could just pay off. Is that cool?
If that happened, I'd love it so much. That sounds great.
It says there's a contrast with Onias III, where Onias was not an accuser of his compatriots. Menelaus is a plotter against his compatriots.
Yeah, and of course, one of the big thematic differences between Second Maccabees and First Maccabees is that First Maccabees was about political liberation, while Second Maccabees is about religious freedom.
Yeah. And there's an emphasis on less hegemonical governance, or at least religious governance. There's more of a Unitarian kind of message to it.
Well, not even a Unitarian message per se.
But at least not let's go out and wipe all these people out, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, we can offer sacrifices for those people. We can, pay respect to their gods.
They just want religious freedom.
Yeah.
Either way.
So on and so
on. Thereupon, Ptolemy took the king out to the courtyard for a breath of air and induced him to change his mind. As a result, the king acquitted Menelaus, the man to blame for the entire evil affair, and condemned to death the poor men who had been released as innocent, even if they had pleaded their case before Scythians. I think there should be a note on Scythians there. It's used quite loosely.
The Scythians were a byword in antiquity for cruelty. Their barbarous behavior was described by Herodotus and Polybius, and Cicero used the Scythians as the standard for cruelty. Gary Morrison notes how the author, by use of this comparison, shows his contempt for Seleucid justice and officials. The counselors received the punishments that Menelaus should have received from Deuteronomy 19, verses 16 through 19. The conditional clause has the form of a simple past conditional clause, emphasizing the author's belief.
Well, let's continue. Quickly, the unjust penalty was inflicted on the men who had been the spokesman for city and country villages and the sacred vessels. In consequence, even Tyrians were indignant and gave them a magnificent funeral. Menelaus, however, retained his office thanks to the greed of those in power, and devoted himself to wickedness, having proved himself to be a plotter against his fellow Jews.
Oof.
Bummer. I think that should be the end of it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
Is that verse 50?
Yeah, that was verse 50.
All right.
Well, that's the end of our readings for the day. So, good bit of commentary.
Yeah, I had to read a lot.
Yes.
But, now we know way more about 170 BC.
And we know way more about those specific 2 chapters of Second Maccabees. So I thought those kind of neat. It was pretty funny. A lot of bribery going on.
Yeah, a lot of political intrigue.
And of course,
there's the golden chariot.
Yeah, that was cool.
Or golden armor.
And those
on
2
a
guys that
Gold
were
armor with the
super
horse.
ornately dressed that whipped him a bunch to death. To death, basically.
Yeah.
On
To
the
point
verge,
where he
the
was
brink
like,
of death. Yeah.
yeah, you got to save his life. And then I guess they stepped up again and did.
Yeah.
And they're magic, so they can just vanish after that. They were weird.
And
I like these chapters. I mean, I have to hear them all anyways, but this felt more engaging and
Definitely.
easily. If you had a bad attention span, this would be something you could engage with a little easier.
And of course, Ruben, I would like to tell you that you are advanced equally in both age and madness.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
It's only gonna go downhill from here.
Yeah, it really is.
screw it. How's our donation drive?
We didn't even
Oh
talk
yeah,
about our new
we
one.
got a new one. That's right. We can't believe we didn't mention it.
Yep.
So since we hit the amount necessary for our
Our alchemy drive.
Yes, our
it's
alchemy
in the
drive.
process. I've found some things that we gotta potentially poison ourselves, basically.
all right, then that's fine.
Woo!
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I hope not.
We'll wear like masks or something.
Yeah, we'll do
You're gonna
something.
go outside and use a fume HUD or a giant fan or 7.
That's a good idea.
Got
too.
a lot of those.
So our new one, our new 666 donation drive is we are going to be doing the Scientology Thetan readings.
We're gonna check
the
to
e-meters.
see how clear we are,
Yeah.
or how bad our thetan level is.
Yeah.
We'll do the test. We'll give each other the test.
Yes,
I
and
bet.
all 3 of us.
I bet Lawrence is the least clear of all of us.
We'll see, I guess. Doesn't that sound fun?
Yep. Yeah, it sounds
That sounds
fun.
like something worth.
So once we
they're
hit,
not super cheap,
Yeah, they're
but
not
there
super
are
cheap.
ways to make them. I'm not sure if we'd want to go for authenticity over price. We'll see. It's 666. It's a good number.
Yeah.
but once we hit $666 in donations, we will get working on getting a thetan meter, I guess.
Aha!
Ooh, thank you, Justin McClure. You are
Thank
the
you,
first.
Justin,
Wow.
for helping us
Start our new goal.
test our Thetans, I guess.
yeah. Second Maccabees is shorter than first Maccabees.
It is.
But it had a lot of commentary. Holy cow.
Well, yeah, definitely.
And relevant commentary, apparently.
After this, we're gonna be doing what? Jubilees?
Yes. After Second Maccabees, we're going to be doing Jubilees, and we already have the Hermenia commentary for Jubilees. It's 2 volumes.
And is there a version of Jubilees on our Amazon wish list?
Better
Maybe.
get that on there.
We should definitely put that on there.
Might be.
I know that one has it. Those the Hermenia.
Well, yeah, the
commentaries do have it.
Hermenia has a translation.
Sure,
in
but
there,
we can definitely pull that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should
More
add that.
equipped.
Speaking of which, if you check out our Amazon wish list, there's all these books on there.
Yeah, the
and
books
you
are
can
great.
make our show even longer.
Or you could make our regular episodes, not even episodes, our regular videos, non-streamed, even longer and even better.
Yeah.
Because more sources. So all that stuff is on there. And what else we got? We got a Patreon too. Did you know that?
Oh, yeah. You can get all the scripts. You can be on this show
You can
Atheist
get
Sunday
shirts.
School. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a new shirt now
Yep.
in our store on Teespring. All links are in the description. The new shirt is Behold the Bible According to Some Jews. And of course, Ruben and I are the Jews in that joke.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't fit me in there. I was raised atheist, so whoops.
Yep.
Well,
So what else we got?
Facebook.
Facebook, Twitter.
Twitter.
Those are free to follow us on there.
You got an Instagram.
I mean, I have an Instagram, but
All right.
Milwaukee-
Follow Lawrence Yufa on Instagram.
I don't even use Instagram that much. I have like 5 pictures on there,
Check those out.
and most of them are memes.
check the 5 memes out.
You can, well,
Thanks
That's-
for joining us
yeah.
today.
Yep. Thank you. We will
See you on Sunday. Links are in the description below.
Yes, they are.